Good evening, happy Thursday, and everybody, welcome back to my man cave. It's that time of week again. Uh, we've got a special guest with us tonight, Jonathan. Uh, Jonathan, take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Heslop. I own Rockwood Charcoal out of St. Louis. I've been involved in the charcoal business for as Rockwood for 11 years now, going on the 11th year. Before that, I was just kind of a hobby, doing it on the side, and eventually made it into a business and a very successful career.
Awesome. And Tanya is running the show upstairs again. Jeff's not going to be with us tonight. Jeff's busy, so it's just going to be us. So once again, as I do every week, we're going to kick off with a little splash. And tonight, I'm going to have a little bit of the Elijah Craig barrel proof in my glass. If you guys are having a drink with us tonight, let me know what you're having and where you are. This is my favorite night of the week. Get to hang out and have a glass of bourbon. Tanya, you got coffee flowing up there?
I sure do. I've got a cat. I've got coffee. I'm set.
There we go. Jonathan, are you having a drink with us tonight?
I've got a Pure Life water here. It's pretty
That'll
good.
work. That's as good as anything these days. Let's see. We got some of the regulars here with us already. Ryan, Smoking Tar Heel Hank, Levi, Mike, Anthony, George is with us, and Quinn. Excellent. Auckland, New Zealand. And yeah, we have an audience here that spans the globe. It's usually west of us time zone wise. I don't coming on the East Coast this time of night. I don't have very many Europeans up late enough to hang out with us. Every now and then somebody drops in, but it's hard to say. So, cheers everybody, and happy Thursday. Anthony wants to know if you're an aviation nut, Jonathan.
Yes,
I
sir.
think
I was a pilot for 15 years prior. Well, kind of same time of doing charcoal. I got out of aviation and quit my career in aviation to found a charcoal company. I was an air ambulance captain for 10 years. I flew the traffic and news helicopters here in St. Louis for several years, and went on from there.
that sounds like fun. One of my barbecue mentors that I took a class from quite a few years ago, Harry Sue. Are you from? Do you know Harry?
I know who he is. Yes, I don't know in person.
Harry was a 747 pilot back
Oh yeah,
before
know
he
that.
moved to the United States. Yep. So he flew for Korean Airlines, I
Okay.
believe, is who he flew for. So, all right, Tanya, we'll bring you back. So I think we need to get. Oops,
You
sorry,
did the wrong
I
person.
kicked the wrong person out of the stream. So, Jonathan, thank you very much for taking a time out of your evening to come on with us. I'm kind of a charcoal nerd, and hardwood lump charcoal is something that I've been playing with, I guess, for 10 years now, or maybe even a little longer. Prior to hardwood lump, I was using Kingsford briquettes in my Weber equipment. When I bought my first Kamado grill, which was a char griller Acorn, I bought a couple of bags of cowboy lump to go with it, and that was my first experience with it. It was kind of an eye opener for me. I didn't realize uh, what advantages might be available in hardwood lump charcoal until I actually tried it, and it was amazing. And it's been an ongoing thing. I've learned a bit about it here and there. I've learned a bit about different styles of hardwood lump charcoal, different sources, and uh, Rockwood. The first time Rockwood got on my radar, I believe, was when I saw it on Doug Hanthorne, the Naked Wiz's charcoal database, because it was right up there at the top of the list.
It's
And
been number one for 9.5 years now.
yeah, I've known Doug for a while. Doug's been on here with me, and
Yeah,
Doug Doug
he's a
kind of
funny
knows
guy.
it.
I
Yeah,
met him at Dizzy Fest at Dizzy Pig headquarters a couple years ago. Real super
all
guy.
right. Yeah, Doug knows everything there is to know about charcoal for sure. And if I ever have a question about it, he's the first person I ask. and because I know there's no brand out there that's publicly available that he probably hasn't had his hands on. And I've never spent a whole lot of time looking at that list before. I became familiar with the Naked Whiz when I was using my ugly drum smoker, because I got some, people back then that were telling me you need to try lump charcoal. And at the time I wasn't so interested in it because it did cost more per pound than briquettes. But what I didn't know at the time that uh, what I like to call BTU potential uh, is probably twice what a briquette is.
Yes, sir.
So it's not really more expensive charcoal. But anyway, how long have you been in the You said 15 years or so you've been in the charcoal business now?
Yeah, I mean, I've had my dad bought a Big Green Egg in 1993 before anybody knew what they were. So I grew up cooking on a Big Green Egg, and you couldn't run briquettes in that. We also had back then too, we had a grillery. Everybody knows what that was now, but back in the early 90s, a grillery was kind of a unicorn. And you had to take a test before the guy that started that would even call you back. He didn't want to sell them to you. He was a professor somewhere in northern Michigan. And one of the questions that I think that you had to check yes on is that you would only use lump charcoal in it.
Right.
But so I learned, I grew up using that. And it was, Missouri is the number one lump charcoal producing state in the country. We produce something like 80% of it here. Between southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, that's where most of it comes from. So I was kind of spoiled that I always had access to it here. And finding a good brand, though, was a little tough. So, when I moved out from my parents and started shopping around St. Louis and I found this brand that I really liked, and they're not in business anymore, but it was wildly price differences up here. And it was hit or miss if you could find it. So anytime I saw it, I'd buy as much as I could, and I'd buy enough for my dad and his neighbor and everything. Well, I knew it was made somewhere down in the Mark Twain forest. I just didn't know where. Well, one night I was airlifting a patient out of a rural helipad, and I was low enough over the trees that as I took off, I flew right over the charcoal plant. I was low enough under my night vision goggles. I could see on the dock the charcoal bag and recognize the logo on it. Well, I wanted to circle and see where this thing was. Of course, this guy laying next to me is bleeding to death and dying, so I couldn't do that. Right. So I mashed the button on the GPS to log the coordinates. And the next morning when I got off work at 6 a.m., I just drove down there and just started driving around and eventually wandered into this charcoal plant. And nobody's there. I'm in a flight suit. You just don't go wandering around out in the woods in Missouri. That's a good way to get killed. So I just kind of stood there by my car, and eventually this guy came out of the woods just covered in charcoal dust. What the hell do you want? And I said, charcoal. And he goes, pull over the dock. John, it was $5 a bag for a 20-pound bag.
That's hard to beat.
Load it up. So we loaded up my Ford Explorer with as much charcoal as I could fit in there. And I brought it back. Like I said, Dad took some, his neighbors took some, the guys at work took some, and I was out. So I drove down there and I did it again, and I did. And the word got out that I had this stuff, and I was, I thought, well, I'll charge a couple bucks for it, just enough to pay for my gas and maybe pay for a set of brakes or maybe a utility trailer so I can go get some more. So I got a utility trailer. Then I got a box trailer. Then next thing I know, I'm renting an Enterprise box truck and driving down there. Mm-hmm. So I thought I kind of got something here. And that's how I got started. That was 2007, 2008.
So at what point did you decide you wanted to be involved in making your own?
So children. So I started having kids, and for every kid that you've got, you better have a job to support that. And, the pilot job is, as much as that sounds like it's fun and interesting, it's pretty damn boring. Actually, you sit around when you go fly, it's fun, but you sit around all day waiting for the phone to ring. So I thought, and everything depends on your health, and it depends on your flight volumes and everything else. Your job could be out of there tomorrow. So I thought I better have some sort of job security. I better have a backup plan here. So I got into real estate. I got my real estate license. I started doing a little bit of realtoring, but you got to meet people. So I thought, why don't I use this charcoal to meet people to sell real estate to? And why don't I was also, charcoal was a hobby. I used it to pay for things. And I was also, still am heavily into firearms and firearms training. And I thought, why don't I teach concealed carry classes? And I'll do that as well on the cheap as a way to meet people to sell real estate to. And so I got into it, and I was doing that on my off days from flying. Met a lot of cool people, still friendships I have today. And I wasn't really too concerned about the real estate thing, but it eventually did work. But all of a sudden I started, like I said, I was driving a box truck down there to get this stuff. And I had my garage completely full of charcoal. And, my now ex-wife told me I had my garage, I had the DeLorean parked on one side. I had the other side completely full of charcoal. She can't park her car in there overnight. And when she's getting home from her nursing job, and she goes, "Get this out of here." So I, started selling it on Craigslist.
Yep.
Sold it all, So I am like selling a bunch of this stuff, and I've got retail interest. People start calling me. Well, I can't just go down there and get this stuff and sell it into retail. They want tax numbers. They want insurance, things like that. So
Right.
I had to get legit, and I decided to make my own brand and get into the process myself. So Rockwood was hatched. I mean, everything around me here in Eureka, Missouri is called Rockwood. We're in Rockwood State Park, basically. So I thought it was a good name. Called it that. I hired a creative marketing company. I called probably 5 or 6 of them here in St. Louis. All but one told me I was crazy and stupid for trying to start a premium charcoal brand. And I finally found one guy. He goes, "I love to barbecue. I love charcoal. Let's do it." So he made me a great deal, and I had these folks develop the Rockwood brand.
That sounds like an interesting way to get into the business. Your wife kicked you out of the garage where you were, you were scalping charcoal that you had bought from another dealer. And it's time at this point, since she's kicking you out of that, you've got to come up with your own manufacturing.
Yeah. So, and I had aspirations of selling it in, let's say, a dozen stores here in St. Louis, specialty stores. And I wanted to make, I don't know, $10,000 a year in revenue, enough that I could take the profit, and that would pay for all my meat, and that would pay for all my expenditures when it came to barbecue. It would be a write-off. Okay. And I was doing the same thing with the firearms. I would do enough concealed carry classes in order to be able to write off all the ammunition and other stuff that I shot through. It was a write-off business. Well, at the end of the first year, I had 63 stores in 13 states.
So
and then I doubled it.
It grew a little quicker than you had imagined.
And then I doubled it. And then I doubled it. And then I doubled it. So every year I doubled it for 5 years, and finally topped out at about 5,000 stores in all 50 states. It's on the shelf of every Ace Hardware in Hawaii.
Nice. So you are nationwide,
Yes.
Alaska and Hawaii.
Yeah, it's in Alaska. I've visited the stores in Hawaii. Use that as an excuse to go down there and ride it off. But so it's all over the country, mainly through Ace Hardware, through some other hardware distributorships, food distributorships, but we also ship nationwide on Amazon and our own website.
I'll have to check my local Ace and see if they have it. I haven't even looked there.
They most likely do. If they don't, they'll have it there in 2 days for you.
Yeah, I'll check with it. The guy that owns our local Ace franchise is a friend of mine, and I've dealt with him in the past.
I may have met him at the conventions. I go to all the Ace conventions. Ace is
very possible. Yeah,
they're my number one customer, and they're a great partner. They helped me grow, and I couldn't have done it without Ace's support. To one question here about Canada, sorry, no, I don't have room in the bag to put all the French or try to comply with all the laws up there, unfortunately.
Andrew is up in Nova Scotia area.
Yeah. We've looked into it. It's too expensive to ship up there, but the amount of modifications and legal stuff that we would have to do to get on the bag, and then it upsets California as well. I mean, why California cares about Canada? Yes, they do. So we had been through enough trouble trying to get it to California. And yes, sir, we've got it at Academy as well, but only Academy in the Southeast, basically from St. Louis to the Southeast. And
I don't know if I've seen that in my Academy. Is it in North Carolina? I'll have to look, because I haven't noticed it in there yet.
It depends on what your distribution center is. If your Academy orders come out of Atlanta area, then yes. If they are Atlanta or the Chattanooga area, then yes. Otherwise, no.
The only lump I've seen in my Academy is B&B, but I haven't looked lately. It's been a couple of months since I've been in there. I I've been burning a lot of pellets lately as well as charcoal. So I buy my pellets at various places that are available. Uh, so Rockwood is nationwide. That's one of the next things I was going to ask you is how far are you? But if you're in every state, that's as good as it gets. Are you looking to continue expanding into additional retailers beyond where you are now?
No, we just don't have the supply. Every bag of charcoal I've got, I sell. It's always
Right.
a wait. It's always a waiting list.
Uh, Bag wise, your bags are 20-pound bags, right?
20 pounds. Yeah,
Uh,
I did not shrinkflate my bags down to 17.6 or 15.84.
So how many bags a day do you produce at Rockwood, roughly?
I mean, it's more, we do it by the truckload, so it varies. I
Yeah,
mean, it's at the end of the year. It's just how many truckloads come out of there. But the bags, it's not any. Some days they're bagging. Some days they're running the loaders. I tell you, I
right,
mean, if you want to hear about the process from start to finish, it usually the wood comes out of the Mark Twain forest. It's all the difference with us is it's all the offcuts off of the timber mill industry. So we don't take down a single tree from
right,
out of the forest to make charcoal. You can't do that in the United States. You'd never be able to afford it, for one.
right.
But two, the environmental, the DNRs wouldn't let you. So the wood comes in, it sits for probably 3
So
to 6
let's
months.
stop there for just a second. I want to expand on that question about that was one of the things I wanted to ask you is about the sourcing of the wood that you turn
Yeah.
into charcoal. Is that coming from sawmills? Is it
Yes, sir.
sawmill
So
leftover?
yes, it's what we call slabs. It's basically the rough cut lumber. It's the pieces that come off the outside of the wood, the
Right.
offcuts, and the pieces that are too knotty or warped to be made
It's
into
the piece
hardwood furniture,
that they can't
flooring.
use.
Exactly. This is not processed wood. This is not anything. It's
Right.
mill scrap, which is very different than construction scrap.
Exactly. That's something I want to talk about because
Yes.
the I see a lot of people looking at charcoal that's come out of whatever bag it is they bought, and they see right angle cuts, and they immediately go to the idea that it's construction scrap.
Yeah, nothing could be further than the truth. Of course, I mean it's going to have a right angle on it because it was cut off a log, but
Right.
that doesn't make it
But
riprap. It doesn't make it floor molding, crown molding, whatever. But
so
there have been brands that use construction scrap, and you'll find flooring and other other mortise pieces in there, and it's
right.
pretty bad. Tongue and
So
groove, that kind of
we
thing.
the pieces that you're using it's kind of a sustainability thing because that is wood that's not going to be used by the lumber mill. If Do you buy all of the scrap from the
Yes.
mills that you buy from, or does it go different places besides you?
It goes into the mulch industry as well. So companies that do chips for playgrounds or need mulch, they
Mhm.
buy truckloads, but they have to process it further than that. There's companies that buy the sawdust. So everything out of the timber milling industry, all of their waste product goes somewhere, but a lot of it goes into the slabs go to the charcoal industry.
So let's compare and contrast that with how South American charcoal's sourced.
So, and I can't speak to all of them, but
Mhm.
a lot of South American charcoal, they just go and they can clear cut the forest. They can tear down every tree in their path and make it into charcoal. And they're not bound by any kind of labor laws down there. So there's a fascinating documentary, very sad one, in fact, on Amazon and Netflix called "The Charcoal People," and there's a couple other ones that talk. They go to the deforestation of what the charcoal industry does down there, as well as the living conditions that these people have to live in making charcoal. Now, it's not for cooking down there. It's for industrial purposes. They use charcoal for making steel.
Right.
Whereas in the United States, we have the machines, we have the things to fire steel plants with coal and other things like that. They can't do that down there, so they use the trees. So a lot of that goes in there. On the other end of things, the manufacturing process, they're not bound by any kind of EPA, any kind of environmental laws, so they can pour as much particulate into the atmosphere as they want.
Right.
Whereas here in Missouri, if you've got white smoke coming off a kiln, it's a $5,000 a day fine. for every
Okay.
kiln that you have connected to that plenum.
So now that you have your wood, what's the next thing that happens in the process?
So it'll sit and age just like you would season firewood, and it'll sit and age for anywhere between 3 to 6 months, maybe more. It just depends where it is in the pile.
Now that's
And then,
something I would not have imagined. So you still have to age it before you can turn it into charcoal.
yeah, so wood will acclimate down to about, we want it somewhere down around 20-25% moisture content.
Right.
And that's what wood will acclimate to after it's left to sit somewhere around the 20% range.
Okay.
And then from there, it gets loaded into a kiln. So a kiln looks like a munitions bunker or a Quonset hut. It's a very big, almost like a pole barn, but it's made out of concrete.
I
And
have some pictures here that you sent. Let me
okay. Check them out.
I didn't bring that up yet. Let me load that up here and we'll have a quick glance at.
Sure. So these kilns, what you're going to see is what's called a Missouri kiln. And yeah, so the kilns are kind of hard to see there, but you see you can drive a loader right into there. And those are thick concrete walls. And see those pipes leaning up against it there. So down the sides of each of them, there's it's almost like drain tile, but it's metal pipe, about 4 inches, about 4 by 4, and you jam those into the side underneath in these little holes. And on the end of it, the outside, there's a little flapping door on it. And to the top of that door, you tie a copper wire and you run that into the kiln and you wrap that around a great big piece of wood in there called a brand. And when the fire gets hot enough and that wood breaks apart or the wire burns up, the door flaps shut, shuts off the oxygen to that portion. So there's about, let's see, there's, 8 on each side and I don't know, 4 across the back. There's about a dozen of them. Let's just say a dozen of them.
There's another picture of that here.
There you go. Yeah. So underneath there, you can kind of see one of those pipes sticking through, but you can take those pipes and push them in and out to kind of adjust where the fire is, where the oxygen is hitting. And you can use a mirror to look in there. And it's just like looking in a fireplace that's been burning for many hours. So it's in there, it's burning upwards 1,500 degrees. And so just like when you burn a piece of wood on a campfire, the first thing you see coming off of the wood is the steam and the white smoke, and that's called the volatiles. That people call them out on the big green egg board. They're the VOC.
Dirty smoke.
VOC, the VOCs, the dirty smoke. That comes off, the white smoke. That's the first thing that's all the tars and the liquors and all the organics left in the wood. That burns off. Then you start, and that's the blue, all the kind of beautiful colored flames that you get. Then you start to see the yellow flames and you start to see ash coming off. That is the wood fiber, the cellulose that's burning.
Right.
Finally, when it hits that point, that log breaks apart and you've got those coals that are glowing all the way through them. That is carbon. That's at the point in the kiln where we shut the fire down. And the fire's not burning anymore. And it takes, so to get to that point, it took a day, day and a half. Then the fire shut down, and it's going to take upwards of a week in some cases for this kiln to cool off enough that you can open the doors. Otherwise, if you open it up, the oxygen rushes back in there and it's on fire again.
Right.
So it's in charcoal, it's knowing when to stop the fire, or so I'm told. It's very much a process of stopping the burning before it starts burning up all your carbon.
So it's burning at that stage when you're burning. What is the significance of the burning in an oxygen reduced environment?
So that's another, that is an internet misnomer that somehow we burn charcoal and zero oxygen. That's not true. You need oxygen to make the fire triangle.
Right.
It's controlled oxygen. It's just like smoking. I mean, when you've got your Kamado grill and you've got that lower draft door open that much, you're controlling the temperature of the fire. What we're doing is, and there is a process called retort. And that's where charcoal is made in a sealed vessel, and you almost bake it per se, and it bakes all the tars and liquors out of it. But the problem is it doesn't get up to a high enough carbonization, and it just doesn't. It's okay for industrial use. It's not good for barbecue, I don't think. But there are charcoals that are made in a retort process.
Right.
But in that process, I guess the word there is you're charring it versus actually burning it.
Okay.
And in good charcoal, you actually have to burn it.
So what are we looking at here? This is your bagging operation?
That's the bagging room. Yeah, you can see that the chutes in the back and just running it down. I didn't have very many pictures for you, but that's...
And this is some of your finished product waiting to go to the bag?
Yeah, so it's piled up. So after it comes out of the kiln, after it cools off for that week or whatever it takes, then it's brought into the coal shed there, and it's spread out over the floor in order to make sure at least 24 hours that it sits on that floor, that it is not on fire anymore. Because just
you don't
like
want to bag it while it's on fire, right?
No, that would involve burning up an entire semi truck of very expensive charcoal and a trailer in the process. But just like when you clean out your fireplace, and you see those glowing embers still when you're putting it into your shopping bag, to clean out the fireplace a day and a half, 2 days later. Right. That's what's going on. Charcoal will sit there and burn like crazy. It takes a hotter temperature to get charcoal lit, but it does not want to go out once it's lit.
Yeah, I've got a metal bucket that I use. When I unload my Kamado, when I use the ash pan at the bottom, it always goes into a metal bucket. And I put the lid on the metal bucket just to keep it dry, but then it's going to be there for several days before it ever finds its way into a garbage can.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So after it's left to cool there on the floor, then it goes over a screening process to get out the first run of what we call fines. Fines are anything that is 3/4 or 1 inch minus in our case.
They call that dust in our world, and everybody hates finding that in the bag.
Well, I'll get to this in a little bit, but it's unavoidable with the product.
Yes.
So it's just like, it's no different than a bag of chips. You're going to end up with stuff in the bottom, no matter if we put them in there one by one or not, just because.
It's simply because the bag can't be held still. It's got to be moved.
Yes, sir. It's agitation breaks it down, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we try to minimize it. But so that goes over the first screening for the fines to get out. Then it gets dumped on a conveyor belt and bounced down a conveyor belt into the bagging room, and we get more fines out of that. And, people think that, oh my God, I found a bunch of fines in there. You guys are dumping fines in the bag. No, we sell those fines. I sell just as much fines as I do charcoal. In some cases.
Was a question I was wanting to ask. Yeah. In terms of sustainability, where does that go, and what does it get used for?
You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. So a lot of places use fines in briquettes. They crush them up, and that becomes the powder, which becomes briquettes.
Right.
But I don't like selling my fines, anything that I have access to. I don't like selling that to companies that are going to become my competition.
Right.
But there are pelletizing companies that buy it and use it in pellets to make the black charcoal pellets. Right. But what I like selling it into is some other industries. We sell fines to a cymbal company that uses it to make brass cymbals. And they use it in their foundries, for brass foundries, because it sucks up the oxygen. We sell it. I've sold fines to the U.S. Army for making flares and all kinds of grenades and munitions. They wouldn't give me any samples, unfortunately. But
that's no good.
I had a fella in here the other day that took some fines for testing, that he's in the fireworks industry. And they're going to use it for fireworks. But my real pet project for the last 8 years has been for agriculture. And biochar, we could do a whole nother podcast about biochar. I won't go too deep into it, but biochar is an amazing product. And it's basically replenishing the carbon back into the soil and providing a micro reef for all these little critters. I gave a truckload of the stuff and a $20,000 grant years ago to a university to do studies with it. The data we got back was off the charts of how good it is for soil, but it's expensive, it's hard to apply, and it doesn't kick in right away. But the evidence would be, every time a forest fire happens, look how lush that forest is within a few years. That's
okay. So what you're saying is the dust that I find in my charcoal bag, I should spread it in my yard?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do not
Okay.
throw it in the trash. Don't throw it. Well, one, I think you should burn it. I mean, there's that dust has just as
I
much.
do.
So I do
Yeah.
what you call top dress. I fill up my Big Green Egg or Kamado Joe. I fill it up with charcoal with a new when it starts getting to the bottom of the bag and it's going to clog your basket there at the bottom. Best product, no affiliation other than the guy's my buddy. The Kick Ash basket. That is the best improvement you can make to any Kamado grill. You don't have to worry about anything once you got that.
That's the first accessory I recommend to people that ask me if your grill doesn't come with it. That's the first thing you've got to have.
I was a Big Green Egg dealer for years, and every one I sold, I included a basket. I just included it because I knew the experience would be better. So I'll start a new bag, and then I'll just use the rest of my old bag and just sprinkle it over the top. And because all that dust, all that the fines, they all have the exact same amount of BTUs in it. It'll burn up. But anything you're not going to use, take it out, dump it in your garden, dump it in your yard, your compost pile, whatever. Don't throw that in the trash. There's no reason to do it. It's going to do good things for you out there. Yeah. But the other thing we're messing around with is we're selling charcoal into the animal feed industry. And for chicken barns and because it keeps the ammonia levels down, feed it to cows, and then the cow eats it. The cow inoculates it for you, and then it stomps it into the ground for you. So it's a great way to settle the cow's stomachs. It reduces their emissions. Right. Everybody loves this biochar stuff, but it just really hasn't caught on yet. So that's my little spiel on biochar. I'll get back over to the barbecue thing.
Have you ever considered the possibility of a Rockwood charcoal pellet?
I started looking into that many years ago. I started looking into briquettes and I started looking into pellets as a way to use our fines many years ago. Unfortunately, getting into that, the equipment to do that, it was shocking how much it was. And this was 7 or 8 years ago, just to get rid of a waste product. And I didn't think the briquettes, and there was a company that came out with 100%, close as you can get to 100% charcoal briquette, which is what I wanted to do. I had already talked to Cargill about pre-gelatinized dextrose products for the binding. Your average briquette out there is loaded with limestone. It's loaded with starches, anthracite coal from the power plants. It's loaded with stuff that doesn't burn. And if you need the evidence,
that's why the ash content is so high on briquettes.
So in the briquettes, when you get that floury ash at the end, that's limestone.
There's less that will combust. That's non-combustible stuff in the charcoal, correct?
So, and they say that they put it in there in order to tell you when to cook because the outside turns white. You don't do that with lump charcoal, by the way. Don't let people do that. When the outside turns white. Well, I know when it's ready to cook on, it's hot. I don't need limestone in there to tell me 100% through that briquette all the way through. You just need it on the surface. Well, that's just a way to weigh the bag down. And those formulas change depending on what time of year it is. And the fact that you can go and buy, 2 20-pound bags of that stuff for, $17 at your local big box store will tell you how much stuff they have in there that's not carbon.
Right.
So, I looked in, back to your question though. I'm sorry, I get off on tangents here. We looked into it and somebody else did a briquette that was 90+% carbon. They were ungodly expensive. They worked great. They were awesome. But it didn't catch on because people that use briquettes, they're not going to pay that. You can tell them you can tell them all day how great it is. They're not going to buy it. So,
I'm using pellet grills now at about the same pace as I'm using my Kamados. My cooking at this time is split about 50-50 between the two. Yeah. And I have played with charcoal pellets and I've got some concern. Do you have a pellet smoker?
No, I don't.
Okay. Have you cooked on one before?
No.
Okay. Most of the people that are coming from some other sort of smoker like a Kamado or something else to a pellet grill, the first thing they notice about pellet smokers is they don't have as heavy a smoke profile as what they're used to. And in my opinion, in the experience I had with the charcoal pellets, it makes the smoke profile even lower on a pellet grill. And to me, it's for obvious reasons. because those volatile compounds that are being burned off when you combust a typical pellet that is not charcoal, or
Yeah,
they don't exist in these charcoal pellets. So
right.
that flavor potential is just not there on a
And
charcoal pellet.
that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a smokeless pellet. Well, basically a charcoal pellet that would be a less smoke profile. And you know how it is, regional barbecue. Some states are all about the smoke. Here in St. Louis, we're
Right.
all about the sauce. In Missouri's, you go into the Southeast, more about the rub. So
Yeah.
it just depends. So there's a lot of people here, they don't like the smoke flavor. So that was my idea, was to make a pellet that had a lower smoke profile, that you
Right.
could do something like fish or poultry and not overload it. And at the same time, I thought, we're going to load
Well,
up the BTU in these things so
you've
that you can
also got
get
a
a bunch of
few
smoke out of it.
and you've got a few guys out there like me who are cooking more than meat on their grills. I bake on my grill. Like I had a cheesecake on mine just
Yeah.
last week, and
I've done pies. Yeah.
it's I'm fortunate enough to have two Kamado grills, and one of my Kamado grills is the one I use for everything but meat. That grill's clean. I don't have a grease residue in there, and I use a clean burning charcoal in that grill, and you can't really tell that there's no smoke profile unless I throw a piece of smoking wood in there. And
Yes.
a
And
pellet grill, that would give the pellet grill the same ability. And that's something I haven't really thought of until just this minute, is I might have a
so,
use for a charcoal pellet
yeah,
to do
well,
to do
the
that
problem,
pellet
the
grill.
problem is that with my thought was that, yeah, I'm going to increase the BTUs in these things, and I'm going to have this smokeless pellet and everything. Well, the BTUs, I thought, what a great idea. Auger fires. So those pellets are designed to be pushed through that auger at a certain rate,
Right.
and they're designed to break it a certain way. And if you don't have all that stuff just right, you're going to light the whole thing on fire, for one.
Yeah.
But the charcoal introduces a very different dynamic than wood does, because charcoal doesn't absorb anything. And I stress the B when I said absorb. It adsorbs,
Right.
adsorbs. And that means it sheds water basically as quick as it takes it on. There's nothing soaking water into charcoal. That's why caveman invented charcoal. It's the oldest manufactured product known to man. It was a way for the caveman to take his fuel from one point to another and be able to get it wet and transport something that was very high in BTU that didn't weigh anything.
Well,
So
I've had the same situation when I get a bag of charcoal that gets rained on for some reason or another. It happens. All I got to do is let it dry out, and it's good to go again.
cut it open, let it sit in the
Yeah,
sun. And that's
exactly.
why I see people going out and buying these waterproof charcoal containers and all
Yeah,
this other stuff. It's you're actually locking the moisture in when you're
right.
doing that. Let it breathe. It is the most my
Yeah,
shelf life. I guarantee it to my dealers that I've got a shelf life of 1 million years guaranteed. There's
right.
the only way that you can screw up charcoal is
Give it
to
give it a
burn.
million years if your dealer's not moving it around anywhere. It doesn't turn into a bag of dust.
And even the only way to get rid of it is to burn it. Now,
Right.
but these misconceptions, they all stem from briquettes.
Mhm.
And getting a briquette wet is a problem because it's full of stuff that does absorb
Right.
rain and water and things
And
like
it
that.
will not dry out and become useful again.
Sawdust, starches,
Yep.
other things, and those things are set to be at a certain moisture content. So
The
that's
briquettes behave a little bit like a pellet. When they get wet, they'll
yes,
puff
sir.
up and they'll fall apart.
Yes, sir. And then you've
Yep.
got problems in your auger. So the
Right.
more I looked into it, the more I realized I didn't understand it and I didn't really belong in that industry. So we chose to partner up and provide charcoal to some pellet manufacturers and just stay out of it.
Excellent. Okay. Well, that pretty much covers how the charcoal's made. Let's tackle a few. Let's see. Let's tackle some myths, or what I think might be myths. Or let me toss something your way and get your feedback on it.
All right.
Like I said when we were talking earlier, I've seen all the arguments. I don't think I've seen a new one in quite a long time. Address the idea of bigger is better when it comes to the size of the chunk of charcoal.
Size doesn't matter. I don't know how many times I've told that to women, but I say it more in the charcoal industry.
But I'm going to argue that slightly with you then, because I believe size does matter.
All right.
But not in the same terms you're thinking.
Yeah. So it's law of conservation of energy, and whether you have 20 Lego bricks built into one or
okay,
all scattered, you have the same amount of BTUs.
I agree on that 100%. Some of the arguments I've seen, the main argument that I see when it comes to the size of the charcoal chunks is in the Kamado grill world. We're staying in the Kamado grill world here because that's where most of my audience is. They believe that if there's a bunch of small pieces in that firebox, even if you've got a kick-ash basket in there, that there's no room for airflow. Talk about that for a moment.
Now that is true. That absolutely is true. However, that doesn't affect the burn time at all. So having a mix of sizes is what you want. You don't want gigantic chunks in there that are the size of a grapefruit because, one, you're never going to get them lit.
Right.
That's the problem right there. And then for it to be able to sustain a fire, you need, it's called a fire bridge. And when you get into the sciences and the engineering of fire, if you've got a piece of charcoal here that burns up, you need to get it over to here. Well, you need a bridge to get it in between. If you've got nothing but all this open air space, you're not going to get it over there. So charcoal burns that it needs you remember your fire triangle that I referenced before. You need oxygen, fuel, and heat. The amount of heat, or a kindling temperature, what I like to call it, you need about 670 degrees to get charcoal to light off. Right. So in a Kamado grill, you've got maybe, if you're running 225, let's say, in a large big green egg or a classic Kamado Joe, you've got maybe the size of a tennis ball in there that's actually burning, that's actually lit up. And you can especially watch this in an extra large big green egg. The fire will migrate around that firebox. It's wild. The little tunnels that fire is made in there if you cook exclusively on an XL. So you need those smaller pieces to connect that. The bigger pieces, yes, it provides an airflow and it keeps the fire from getting choked, which is kind of I'm not going to say a design flaw in a Kamado, but it is a limitation that you have. Now, so that is exclusive to Kamados. Mm-hmm. But the argument that somehow I put in 10 pounds of charcoal into my big green egg and I burned it at 225, and since it was small, it burned faster. There is no way that can happen. Right. That is not physically engineered, and the laws of nature will not allow that to happen.
That's one of the other arguments that comes up in these debates is the speed at which it burns based on the size of the chunk. And the other argument is they'll say that the larger chunks burn hotter than the smaller chunks.
No, that's not possible. So in the Lego brick analogy, whether you put it all back together or not, it's the same amount of BTUs going in there. So my charcoal has about 12,000 BTU per pound. And whether you have that in a pile of fines in your hand or in one gigantic chunk, it's the same. It's moreover the temperature that you want to run that at. And getting that gigantic chunk of charcoal up to 7, so the whole thing is 700 something degrees and burning like wildfire, that's pretty hard to do. And I wish I would have sent you a picture of this, but what charcoal looks like under an electron microscope is almost like a sponge. It is extremely porous. If you were to take so the porosity of charcoal, you're going to love this. And I'm an engineer by trade, so if I get too deep into it, you're going to have to stop me. The porosity of charcoal that's at an 80 to 85% carbonization rate, which is where it should be, is roughly 250 square meters per gram. And the 1,000 goes to the gram, but just a different way. So 250 meters per gram. So that's roughly the size of, let's say, a tennis ball chunk of charcoal splayed out would cover a tennis court on surface area. That is why charcoal is used in filters.
Right.
So The porosity of it, where I'm going with this is that the oxygen gets in to all the nooks and crannies of that charcoal, and it burns from the inside out. And that's why when in your fireplace, in your campfires, in your big green egg or Kamado Joe, when you're doing a pizza, whatever, when you see those glowing red coals, that thing is burning 100% all the way through because the oxygen can access those little holes.
So,
right. So
the differentiation between that and a chunk of charcoal that's not fully carbonized.
So imagine that big chunk of charcoal that's not fully carbonized is a sponge that's full of water, because the whole purpose of the charcoal process, the kilning process or pyrolysis, distilling, whatever you want to call it, is to get the water out of it. And the water is contained in wood fiber. It's contained into the tars and the liquors that are contained inside of all those cell membranes that are in there. So as we burn that stuff, all that stuff burns off at a lower temperature. So when you, again, back to that piece of firewood, the first thing that lights off are alcohols. That alcohol burns at 163 degrees. So that leaves that at that temperature. Wood leaves it when it hits 212. I'm sorry, water leaves it when it hits 200. The wood fibers burn around 300-400, just like, paper does. So when it gets finally up to 700 degrees, that's when it starts burning the carbon out of it. And it clears all of those little valleys and little chunks and all those little holes and crevices in there. And it basically melts out of there. And then the oxygen can come in there and it can tap every piece of surface area in that charcoal. So it doesn't matter if you've got a little chunk or a big chunk, because I say a big chunk, I'm talking about a size of let's say a tennis ball, something like that, or bigger, baseball size, that the oxygen is going to get in there if it's properly carbonized.
Right.
Here's the problem. People get all horny when they see these chunks that they're the size of somebody's head or a cantaloupe. And there's a reason why it's that size. There's wood fiber holding it together.
Right.
If it was properly carbonized to 80 or 85%, that chunk would have split apart into a million
on its own
pieces. It would have broken into pieces. And that's what happens in your fireplace or your campfire. You see those pieces break apart.
So those big pieces are the pieces you don't. I keep a hatchet out here in case I run into pieces like that, so I can break them apart to make them smaller. And George here has a comment that I've put up on the screen, because this is one of the situations where I do feel like the size of the charcoal makes a difference. And this is for direct grilling and not for indirect smoking like we were talking about.
You're going to want to use, you're not going to want to use those big chunks for grilling, because they're not going to light off. I mean, you're not going to get an even burn out of them. And the problem is too, is that if it is that big, again, it has water and wood fiber in it, which is going to produce. So
the problem I have with the larger pieces for direct grilling is getting an even heat surface.
Yeah.
Because the smaller pieces, like the golf ball size pieces, a layer of those makes a perfectly even layer of heat that I can work over. If I've got softball size pieces in there, I've got hot spots and cold spots all over the place.
And the reason is those are burning at a different temperature because they are still full of water and wood fiber. But here's the easiest way to test everything. And John, when you take that hatchet to them, are you able to break those pieces apart with one smack, or does some of them pretty?
No, it breaks off from the outside and leaves the inside together.
That's why. And that's you're hitting wood fiber. So any piece of charcoal that's properly kilned, you should be able to break it apart with your hands. Right. You just grab it, break it apart. You should be able to drop it on the pavement and it shatters like glass.
This charcoal, like the Rockwood charcoal and the charcoals that you're talking about here, have a distinctive sound when you tap the pieces together.
Yes, sir.
It's almost like a metal, a dinging sound.
It should sound, because that's the sound of carbon. So when you tap, 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 I mean, steel's made out of carbon. That's why it's metallic. But it should sound like driveway chalk. If it's got a shape or a feel to it, and when we get it really carbonized, if you can go like 85, 87+%, it almost has like this iridescent finish on it that you'll see on metal. And it's a beautiful colors that you see on it. And you can break it apart by hand. If you drop it on the floor, it shatters. If it doesn't
Right.
do that, if you can't break it apart by hand, and when you drop it, it goes thud, that
Mhm.
means you still have wood. And
So
in smoking, that's not a bad thing. I mean, we're going to be, if you've got a big chunk, throw it in there. It's not going to hurt anything unless you really don't want that smoke. Here's why I made Rockwood the way it was, though. I wanted something very highly carbonized that you could actually use smoking woods
mhm.
to control the flavor profile and intensity.
That's where I wanted to go next.
Yeah.
The some of the higher density, not fully carbonized South American charcoal that I use, it has a smoke profile that's a lot bolder, but
Yes, sir.
I don't have control of it. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. I never really know what I'm going to get. I know what I'm going to get when I put something like Rockwood in my firebox and put 1 or 2 fist-sized chunks of hickory in there behind it. I'm going to get a consistent uh,
Yeah.
burn and consistent smoke every time.
A lot of those South American woods come from species I can't pronounce, and they're a walnut based or a cashew. It's a nut based wood.
Mhm.
This is the stuff that they make ipe decking out of, and tiger woods, astroneums, all these other. It makes great decking. I don't think it makes very good charcoal, but if you don't have it kilned to those very high carbonization, you're going to get smoke. And smoke
Right.
off a walnut or a cashew wood is not a smoke that you're going to want to put on a piece of meat,
Okay.
unfortunately. So that's where you got to do that thing where people say, "Oh, you put it in, you let it burn for like a half hour, an hour." Basically, you're buying charred wood at that point,
Mhm.
and you're turning it into charcoal in your smoker by finishing it off. We've already done that process for you. Now, I mean, this is an all natural product. It's made in a process that's hundreds of years old, if not thousands. And there's going to be pieces that are in there that are occasionally that are underkilled. But
Right.
when we're using Missouri oak and hickory and cherry and woods that you're already smoking with, you're not going to notice a little bit the difference between those woods. And anything we do add smoke wise, it's going to be good. You're not going to,
Yeah.
it's not going to ruin your meat by putting in some nasty stink wood in it.
Hickory's my jam, man. That hickory is so easily available here, and I'm in Western North Carolina, and hickory is a thing here. It's it's one of my favorite smoke profiles.
We just shipped charcoal to your neighbor over there in
Yeah,
Hickory, North Carolina.
yep.
So,
So I'll go visit him, and I'm gonna also check with my ace guy. The ace guy is closer to me than the guy over in Hickory, and I'll see if the ace has it. But there was one other thing I wanted to touch on, and it's escaping me here at the moment. Maybe it'll come to me in a second. I was just thinking about it.
so I just say, I mean, as you go out and try. I mean, I don't like try to put myself in saying we're better than anybody else or anything like that. Try them all. I mean, if you like those tastes, you like those brands, they work well for you. That's great. I'm not saying switch over to anything. People sometimes feel like I'm trying to say otherwise. It's just we set out and we make a very limited amount in the grand scheme of things in the charcoal industry, but we try to make it as consistent as possible. And in a smoking world, your biggest thing that changes is the meat. I mean, you know that
Right.
from a brisket. The cow drives the cook, right? That's probably 50+% of your cook is that the variances in the meat. So we try to get everything as close as possible so that you don't really have to worry much about the fuel. You probably got your smoker dialed in. We let you get the fuel dialed in. Then you got your seasoning
Yes.
rubs. All you have to worry about is that piece of meat. That
Right.
was what I was trying to do with Rockwood when I started it 11
And
years ago.
this is something I've said more times than I'm comfortable with admitting is you don't blame the charcoal for a failed cook. You don't blame the grill for
Oh,
a
believe
failed
me, we
cook.
get blamed all the time.
No, if a cook fails, it's this guy right here that did
Yeah.
something wrong. It's not the fault of the grill or the fault of the charcoal. I did a video a while back. Maybe if I think about it, I'll send you a link to it. I think the title of this video is "Don't Blame the Charcoal," because I tried to dispel some of these myths about small pieces not being able to get hot or
John,
not
I
burning
saw that
long.
video and somebody
Okay.
sent it to me, and I was so excited when I saw that. I didn't have your contact info, so when you emailed me, I was tickled pink that that you email me and I get to talk to you, because it's like, here's a guy that gets it. Here's a guy
So
that understands.
I just have fun with it, and it's the problem is, Jonathan, I'm beating a dead horse. I don't feel like there's enough people
I
voicing
gave
the
up.
same things I've done, and it's one of the things that I like to compare this with is back when and the guys, I don't like to be political, but I'm just going to use this as an example. Back when Barack Obama was campaigning for president, he said over and over and over again, I'm going to save you $2,500 a year on health insurance with our Obamacare. And once you hear something said enough times,
Yeah.
it becomes fact. You accept it as fact. And we're short these days on critical thinking when it comes to understanding why something is or how something is, and that's my problem. And my wife, let me go ahead and bring her back up here because she's going to be helping us out here in a minute. Tanya will tell you that I'm never satisfied with somebody telling me something. I've got to understand it or understand why. So Tanya, what kind of questions have we missed here tonight that we need to address?
Yeah, I'd like to get a couple of those.
There are a couple. So the first one is from Anthony. What are the various flavors type of hardwood? Sorry, I teach computers. When I see hard, I think where. Anyway, it's in your charcoal.
It's mainly oak, Missouri white oak and red oak. It's the same thing that we're making barrels out of here in Missouri, everything that's used in the wine industry. So it's Missouri white and red oak, mainly, I would say probably 80%. But there's hickory in there, there's pecan, there's cherry, there's whatever's coming out of the timber mills that day, but it's mostly oak.
Okay. And then we've got this one. I don't even know how to say
It's quebracho.
Yeah,
that's the South American. That's the primary piece. I think that a lot of the South American charcoal is made out of. That's a very abundant source.
They call it, yeah. It's a walnut. It's a nut wood. And to your point here about asking about the complaints of the smelly, oily aftertaste, those are the volatiles that are still in that wood. It's a very, I call it stink wood because you burn it, it doesn't smell very good.
It has a chemical smell. It almost smells like a kerosene sometimes, or a fuel. And I've wondered about that because I have burned a lot of bags of charcoal, and I've burned a lot of bags of South American hardwood charcoal, and I have only experienced this problem 2 or 3 times, and we're talking hundreds of bags of charcoal. But it's a common complaint, and I've seen the complaint on many brands, so I know it's not just one brand that's doing it. So it's you're saying that it's just that the wood's not carbonized enough to have those VOCs burned off.
That's correct. Yes, because charcoal, like I said, you want it 80 to 85%. Anything less than that, you're not going to be able to break it apart by hand. And it's got wood fiber, which means it's got water and volatiles in it, and that's where those smells are coming from.
Is there any way you could spot that before it goes into your smoker?
Break it apart by hand. If you can't do it, it's not there. Also,
so if you've got a really huge hunk, that's going to be the piece that's suspect to start with, right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So and if you're using a US based charcoal, then it's most likely it's going to be oak or hickory, and that's safe to use. And if you've got something that's a little underkilned because you can't get a product like ours, or you're happy with saving money, you just burn it and let it burn for 20, 30 minutes until it stops producing that white smoke off the top. Now,
that was the question. Okay, that was the question I wanted to ask. Your charcoal, is it even all right, Big Green Egg, you've got a Big Green Egg, so you're familiar with the idea of dirty smoke.
It's another internet kind of misnomer. Okay. I like to call it
is it possible to get dirty smoke in any way, shape, or form from your charcoal?
I don't know how to define the word dirty smoke.
Okay.
That's something that comes up over and over. And you got people that talk about white smoke. You got people that talk about blue smoke. To me, it's smoke.
White smoke is the most commonly referred to dirty smoke, and there's very little differentiation if that smoke is coming from the charcoal or if it's coming from the grease residue that's left behind in the grill.
There you go. And that's something that you've got to do. And that's something that I wrote about in blogs and other places to people is the charcoal smoke. No, it's not. It's all the grease on the inside of your grill. You need to do a clean burn. And that's something that needs to be done frequently in any grill, is to get rid of the grease smoke. And that's where a lot of these, the bitterness comes from in those smokes is usually it's a grease issue, not necessarily.
It's not the charcoal.
But having a charcoal that you need to burn off for 20 to 30 minutes before you start to see, clear coming out of it versus it just bellowing white smoke, you just burned off, a quarter of the product. Why didn't you just spend a little bit more to be able to go? So that's why we sell a lot of charcoal to restaurants. Here in St. Louis, the ones that have live fire in their restaurants, because they don't want all that smoke in their restaurant.
Right.
And they don't want to have to burn it off 20 or 30 minutes either. They want to be able to throw it in and go.
I'm not sure I understand Boder's question here. He says,
curious.
Okay, tell us about that, because I don't understand the question.
Okay, so this is something that used to happen back a long, long time ago when you could still slow burn. We have to fast burn here in the U.S. now, and I'll tell you why in a second. But what, Boder, I believe you're referring to is the volatiles, the tars and the liquors that come out of the woods. And they would almost like leach out of the woods. And there was a trough, almost like in your basement or something, like almost like a sump pump would collect. And they could bottle those tars and liquors. And what do they use them for? Alcohol. It was used as medicinal purposes. And we've had people ask for those many times. Now, that was back when you could run charcoal and you could burn it at a very low temperature. And you can make it a higher carbonization. Unfortunately, in the United States, you can't really do that anymore because all of the emissions, all the smoke that comes off the top of our kilns has to be burned up to about 1,500 degrees. And that's basically a catalytic converter, if you will, that we burn all of the white, all the particulate, because that's what smoke is. It's a particulate up there. And we fire that smoke to 1,500 degrees to burn the particulate out of it so it comes off clear. When you do that, you create a flue effect, and that pulls more air through those kilns. It burns. So all those tars and liquors, those are burned away. We can't capture them anymore, unfortunately.
They're just burned off. They're burned out of the smoke that's coming off the process.
Yeah, they turn into smoke. That's what turns into your white smoke. Yes.
Brian, I try to not have less than 5 bags of charcoal on hand at any given time. I think I currently have 10 maybe, and it's not necessary, but I don't know. It's kind of like, I'm sure Jonathan's got the same situation. Jonathan has he and I apparently both share a hobby about firearms. I want to have a certain amount of ammo on hand at any given time. And it's the same with charcoal. So
I've got, I'm looking here outside the door. I've got 13,392 bags. So I got you beat.
So, yeah, but that's not a fair comparison.
I have to tell you how happy I am in this moment. And I'm going to tell you why I'm happy is because charcoal. Holy Jesus, charcoal in the garage, charcoal. The building is full of charcoal. There's charcoal in the basement. Charcoal. But
hey, in 2020, when the world stopped for those couple months, and let me tell you, charcoal was a panic buy item, and it was because people were worried. I always keep it on hand at my house. I've got a wood stove. If emergency hits, I can heat my house on charcoal.
Right, Jonathan. When I was doing social media work directly for Kamado Joe would ship me a pallet of charcoal on demand. So I would get 40 bags at a time, and that's what Tanya's talking about. I would have charcoal stacked here and there in some inconvenient places sometimes.
Tanya, it's a great way to absorb smells. If you've got to ever have problems, you're trying to get a room that you put a pallet of charcoal in there. The best way in your refrigerator, don't ever put the baking soda thing in the refrigerator is a joke. Put a cup Put a pitcher full of charcoal in there. It'll absorb the smells. And then just swap it out every month. Throw it in the Big Green Egg or whatever, and then put a new one in there. Charcoal is a miracle product. It works for everything. We carry it on the ambulance.
Dennis wants to know what causes more ash.
I don't understand the question. More ash.
I think I understand this one.
A less carbonized charcoal will cause more ash because it has wood fiber and volatiles still in it. Right. So a 20-pound bag of my charcoal cooks down to roughly 20 ounces or less of charcoal, or of ash rather. So, you can about a softball size amount of ash is what will come out of a 20-pound bag. Our
out
ash
of 20 pounds. When you
it's
burn
a little over a pound, we've got a little over a pound per 20. So our ash content's around 5-6%, something like that.
If you burn a 20-pound bag of briquettes, you'll get 3 pounds or better, or maybe even 4.
Oh, it's more than that.
Ash. Yeah.
It depends. It just depends on the mix of what recipe they're using at that point of the year because of margins.
I have burned briquettes in my Kamado grills before. It's not one of these situations where you can't do it. It's just not the most efficient way to run a Kamado.
No, I thought we had the recipe down. We had it all planned out, and I just knew that no one was gonna pay that for a briquette. Now, with the steak guys doing that, the steak championships on these PK grills and everything, I think they do have a place now. I think we would have done okay with them, but I mean, that's such a limited market to go and drop $4 or $5 million on a briquette plant. It just wasn't.
And I don't know. The SCA is such a. I've studied that situation. That organization's propping up PK grills, and it's propping up B&B. Those big briquettes that B&B makes, and it's propping up the grill grates.
Yeah, and some of those other ones, it's not necessarily a briquette. It's made with an extrusion method, and I looked into that as well. The extrusion methods, and the problem is, again, getting the stuff to stick together. And there was a brand on Shark Tank that went with a extrusion method, and it was all this hit because of the marketing, and it fizzled out in no time.
Just out of curiosity, do you know anything about the coconut charcoal that the guy from Kamado makes down in Malaysia?
Coconut charcoal is a big thing. I saw it a lot over
That's extruded.
In the last couple of years when I've been in Hawaii, I've seen people cooking on that extruded product. And what it is, it's all that coconut oil in there that helps it stick together, because otherwise charcoal is, I mean, if you think of graphite, powdered graphite, charcoal is basically a lubricant almost in some sense, because it does not absorb anything.
He's not in Malaysia. He's in Indonesia. He's in Bali.
Yeah, it's all over there. Any place they got coconuts, they're making coconut charcoal.
Have you cooked with it before?
I have not, no.
I haven't either, so I don't have any experience with how clean. I've heard it's a very clean burn, but I don't know anything about it beyond that. So, Tanya, do we have any more questions that we need to hit on?
I think that is all of the big ones.
Okay.
Yeah, and Andrew's.
I have a question.
Point there. He said the paper industry. I'm sorry.
Does the coconut charcoal smell like coconut?
No.
Oh, well, that's very disappointing.
It's made from the hulls. It's not made from the meat.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, the paper, they capture the liquors for other purposes. Yeah, they get it out of there, and it's just the temperature. We're running such a high temperature that they burn out of there. But yeah, so we make a product basically that's a waste product. We take all of our raw materials come as a waste product from the milling industry, and then we take our waste product and move that into the agriculture industry. So we are a zero waste product, and what we burn off on one side, we're doing very clean to comply with the laws, and then we're trying to bury the carbon emissions that we do. We try to bury on the other side of the business with the agriculture. We're never going to get carbon neutral, but it's a step getting there.
But it's sustainability in forms that you won't see in South American product, because you guys are not harvesting trees.
Correct.
For the purpose of creating the charcoal.
Correct. Yes, and we have, and the people that make charcoal get paid a lot of money to do it, because it's a very exhausting and dirty and miserable process to do
Right.
it. So they get paid, you know, probably 100 or 1,000 times more than these folks down in South America do. It's pretty much slave labor down there. And then yes, it's responsibly forest. Any tree you take down in Missouri, you've got to have to have a plan to put it back up. And then the smoke emissions. So in Missouri, Missouri was the last state in the union to regulate charcoal burning, and it wasn't until the governor's brother sold his charcoal plant that they were allowed to come. The EPA was allowed to come into Missouri and shut down. I would say half of the charcoal business. This was in the late '90s. Half of the businesses went out of business because they couldn't come up with a system to burn the smoke out and make it. And then the companies that did comply came up with smoke burner systems because they didn't really give them much of a guidance. They all went out of business within a couple of years because they couldn't afford the propane to fire those smoke burners. So there is a very fractional amount left of charcoal manufacturers than there were 20 years ago, 30 years ago here in Missouri.
Janice's, you've got Janice's stamp of approval.
Yeah.
Janice.
Well, yeah, I'm really impressed too. Hearing about how it's being used in agriculture and everything else, things like that are important to me. So, hearing that, I'm sitting here going, hey, if I were grilling, I know what I'd be using.
I mean, so for the agricultural portion of it, for like the animal feeds, I ground up charcoal at home and I encapsulated it in pills. And I started taking it so that when I went out to these cattle farmers and chicken farmers and everything, I say, hey, I eat charcoal every day. And look at me, I'm fine. It's because they're like, you eat charcoal, you eat out of your mind. And I got the idea for that the guy that but popularized the Kevlar bulletproof vest, he'd go into a police station and shoot himself in the chest with a 38 right in front of him. And that's how he sold bulletproof vest. And the cops, they would go, oh my God, this thing works. I want it. So, I go in there looking as healthy as I am and I eat charcoal.
There you go. All right. Well, Jonathan, I appreciate you coming on with us. We're going to wrap things up. We've gone a little over, and I don't want to hold you up. I definitely appreciate you taking the time to come talk about charcoal with us tonight. Charcoal, like I said, when I contacted you about this, it's a topic that I'm passionate about, and it's always fun to have somebody else that has the same level or probably a significantly higher level of passion about charcoal than I do. So.
And thank you for going out there and testing things and not just doing the YouTube method of taking a chimney starter full of charcoal, 6 different ones, and lighting it and seeing how long it takes. That is the worst test people do. You figured out that it's a lot more than that. And I commend you for that. And I thank you for spreading the good word about that and having me on tonight to talk more about it.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. And guys, thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you once again next Thursday. Y'all have a good week.